Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session today. We're really fortunate at LinkedIn to attract great speakers to our in-day speaker series. Today's no exception. We have Geoffrey Moore, very well-known author, speaker, advisor, partner at Moore David Dow, and author of a new book called Escape Velocity, which I encourage you all to read. I've been spending some time with it, and I'm finding it fascinating. So without any further ado, I'd like to just turn it over to Geoffrey and
Let's get it done. Okay, good deal. Well, so yeah, you're in the presence of an author with a new book, which is a little bit like fire hose time, so watch out. But what I would like to do is kind of share some ideas from the book, and in particular some ones that, that relate to things that can change in the next 90 to 180 days at LinkedIn. And in particular, the first book I wrote was a book called Crossing the Chasm. And that was that book was actually written for B2B innovations, because at that time you couldn't start a business as a B2C business in tech. Tech had to start at the top with the enterprise, and eventually you'd get a consumer product maybe 5 to 10 years later out of that thing. The last decade has been just the opposite. The last decade, enterprise IT has kind of been in the doldrums, but consumer IT and end user IT has taken off. And it requires a new model. There's a new model for how you spin up a business, and it's not crossing the chasm. And so I wanted to be able to, oh, terrific, thank you very much. I wanted to be able to share that in particular with you because I think you'll find it hopefully pretty interesting. But while the books, just a quick thing, the high-tech sector keeps changing. And so about every 5 years, it feels like the problem's changed enough that it's like time. Okay, so it's been 20 years and fifth book on high-tech stuff. Also in tech, unlike other industries that don't change as fast, you have to make your bets before you can know. So you can do all the research you want, but the problem is you can't research the future. And so if you're in a business that's been around for a long time, like oil and gas or pharmaceuticals, research-based decision-making is really good. But for you guys, the social networking protocol for, business. We don't even know what it is yet. So you have to make bets, and we call it high-risk, low-data decision-making. So when you do that, how do human beings do that better? And the answer is we create stories, we create narratives, we create models, we create frameworks, and we say, this is what we think the future is going to look like, and this is how it sticks together. This is the coherent vision. And then we take those frameworks and we say, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but it resonated with me, so I'm going to bet on that framework. And then you take it into the actual real world and you start trying to organize around the framework. And some of it works and some of it doesn't work. And part of what Silicon Valley's been great at is discarding the stuff that doesn't work and revamping the model and moving on as fast as possible. And by the way, we kind of take that for granted in this room. There's no place else in the world that does that. Literally, every place else in the world does an attempt at it. Nobody in the world is anywhere near as good at it as this valley. That is our genuine crown jewel in this valley. So it's a kind of an extraordinary capability. It's fun, but if you write books, it's hard to keep up with. So basically, what I want to do here is I want to introduce a framework of frameworks called the hierarchy of powers. And then I want to double-click on 2 powers and some of the models that are underneath it, because I think they're very practical in some of the things you're confronting. But this first part then is I just want to give you kind of a 50,000 overview of what's the book about and where's it going. So the first thing you ask about a book is, well, what's it for? What are you trying to change in the world? And the problem I'm trying to change in the world this time around is we have large iconic companies. In the book we went through, well, you'll see in the next slide, a whole lot of companies have gone out of existence. And the problem was in the 90s, that was kind of okay. There was a guy, an economist who called it creative destruction. Yes, this one went away, but a new guy came in. But we rebuild company after company after company. Well, you're the richest country in the world, with the most vibrant market in the world, with the most talented employee base in the world, you can probably get away with throwing a lot of stuff out. This is a new century. We are not the most vibrant economy in the world. We will not be the most vibrant economy of this century. And we will not have the advantages that we've had for the last century. And we can't screw up as much as we used to. And so the idea is, how would you not screw up quite so much? So the challenge is, the world's changing. The management team in established enterprises, I'm particularly concerned now of the established enterprises, the enterprises that are under threat right now, the Yahoos, the HPs, Cisco's under pressure, Microsoft's under pressore, I don't want these companies to say, well, you know, but it's okay because we have a new crop. I don't think we can afford to throw away the old crop. So the problem is, if you're on the management team at a big company, at a successful company, you get that the world's changing, and you see the new opportunities, and you invest in them, and you start initiatives, and you have strategic plans, and you present to your board, and you do all this kind of stuff, but year in and year out, you kind of go, man, nothing really new has made it to the finish line. We started a lot of races, we didn't finish very many. And so that's where this metaphor of escape velocity came from, because the subtitle was Free Your Company's Future from the Pull of the Past. And probably the most painful, and there's a lot of examples of this, every company on this list is essentially no longer a viable company. And you look at that list of companies, you go, holy smoke. I mean, maybe I'm a little ahead of myself with the one in the middle there. But the point is, for a whole lot of people in this world, I'm not, right? Now, I hope I'm wrong. I mean, I don't want any of these companies not to be successful. But they're under an enormous amount of pressure. And these are not bad companies. These are not like, well, these are the ones that had the bad management teams. This was the best of the best of the best. These were the ultimate winners in their fights. So I guess the thing I would encourage you to do is, I know you think you're very smart, and you are, but so were these people. So don't think you're so smart that this can't happen to you, because it can. And I don't want it to happen. So if you ask what did happen, what happened in these companies is, when you become a public company, you become an iconic company, you end up having this core business that generates an enormous amount of revenue and an enormous amount of profit. And it's great. But over time, it kind of gets a little bit long in the tooth. And so it's still a real business. The margins get a little bit smaller and smaller, but it's still a good business. And meanwhile, the world's kind of moving on. And the world's looking to you saying, moving on, moving on. And you kind of try to go over there to move on with the world, but you can't somehow get over there. And so what happens is you end up spending, in every quarter, of course, you're a public company, you have to worry about, well, did I make the quarter? Did I make the annual fiscal plan? So we're very performance-oriented in America, very performance-oriented with our public companies. So you have performance commitments, which you must make. And so on the other hand, you have these future power commitments, which is, you know, I need to become more powerful so I can fuel future performance, but the same people that would do that also are key to making the current quarter, and at the end of the day, I end up making the current quarter, which means I kind of run out of power over time. Because I'm not investing enough in it. So this book is a book to try to say to management teams, how do we get the power dialogue on the table in a clear and explicit way that we can hold ourselves accountable to in our annual planning, in our compensation plans, not just hold ourselves accountable to the financial results, but also to the power results. Because otherwise, you're going to quietly liquidate your company. And I would claim that there's a bunch of, quote, successful firms in this valley that have basically been successful because they've just been liquidating unbelievable power positions. But eventually, you run out of power and you run out of gas. And that's where those 40 companies came from. So if you want to say, OK, we're going to be competent about power, one of the things you discover, because this is a discussion about strategy or vision or whatever you want to talk about, is it gets very garbled very quickly, because nobody means the same thing by strategy when they start talking about it. So as a strategy consultant, what we began to realize is you have to sort out this conversation into 5 strands. And these are 5 different kinds of power. They interact with each other. But in general, the ones at the top are more powerful than the ones at the bottom. And each one is important to look at separately, even though they interact. So the first one is just, do you have your company in growth categories where basically you'll just get growth because you're in a hot category, right? So you're in social networking. You know what? Great category. If you're Michael Dell right now, you're in desktops, right? Not so good, right? You know, Dell may be a much, much better manager than anybody in this room, but he's sailing into the wind and you're sailing with the wind. So part of the responsibility of the board and of the senior management of the company is to make sure that this company stays in a vibrant set of categories. Now, they don't all have to be hypergrowth. Some of them can be what they call cash cows. Some can be rising stars. But eventually, what you don't want to be is in a position where Sun got, where it had no place to go, or Kodak, where there was no place to go, right? So you have to be, and the problem is in any given year, investing in the new category and taking money out of the existing category will look bad on your quarterly report card, right? This is how we get into trouble. So we have a quarterly report card, and for a while we have enough surplus that we can do both. HP for a long time had a lot of surplus because of those inkjet cartridges that we all paid for, right? Then we stopped printing. That was bad for HP. And so as a result, they lost their resource surplus. And now you have the CEO saying, I can't afford to fight 2 wars in 2 different fronts anymore. I can't fight Google and Apple with my volume business and Oracle and IBM with my enterprise business. I got to pick one, okay? So that's the kind of stuff about if you don't play your category power correctly, you get into those kinds of positions. Right now, you do not have a category problem at LinkedIn. You're in a great category, okay? Company power. Okay, so you're in a great category, but you get more than your fair share, or does the other guy get more than their fair share? So MySpace is in a great category. Not so good, right? Not so good. So the issue then is, and that has to do with how do you make yourself different? You've done something very, very interesting as a company, which is your most obvious reference competitor is Facebook. They are most obviously a consumer family relationship kind of world. And you guys early on said, we think there's a business analog to social networking that plays out differently. And you've invested in that area. And the world has bought your act. And the world has assigned a high price earnings ratio to your stock because they think not only are you in a great category, but you've defined a very interesting position in that category that appears to be unique to you, and it appears to give you lots of opportunity to exploit in a way from a leader point of view. So even though when and if Facebook went public, its market cap would undoubtedly be higher than yours, yours doesn't get as jeopardized as it might otherwise because people say, yes, but this is the opportunity that we think LinkedIn has carved out. It's a very interesting opportunity. And part of what you're doing right now is figuring out what are the boundaries of my company power. And this is a very, very delicate dance. Because if you go too far and you have too many failure modes, then people think, oh, you're not as strong as I thought you were. But if you don't go far enough, if you don't take enough risk, it's like, well, they win everything, but they're majoring in minors. I mean, they won the New Hampshire primary. Great. All the delegates from New Hampshire, way to go, right? It's actually, there are 50 states, but you got one, right? So the issue is, how do I go from New Hampshire primary? You don't try to, no president wins all 50 states. There's a couple that came close because we had spectacularly bad candidates in the other party. But in general, the object isn't to win 150 states. The object is to win more electoral votes than the other guy, right? And so this interesting thing, that gets us into market power, which is which markets are you going to play in? The idea is you'd like to play in markets where you can become the definitive winner. You don't want to come in third in the New Hampshire primary, right? You want to come in first. Right? And so if you can't win in New Hampshire, you should probably go to Iowa. If you can't win in Iowa, you should probably be in California. Wherever you think are the ones you can win. And so a lot of the dialogue that's going to go on this year and next year and the following year at LinkedIn is going to be figuring out what are the natural boundaries of our competitive advantage as a company. And that's not just geographical markets. It's actually applications, whatever. But it feels like you have a natural center of gravity. It kind of feels like you have a national capital around this notion of both literal recruiting, but more importantly, we were talking about earlier this morning, virtual recruiting, and the whole professional social network. And the fact is, business is social, and you've got a very interesting way of enabling that. And how that plays out, the world doesn't quite know, you don't quite know, but it feels pretty interesting. But I do think it'll play out in some markets faster than in other markets. And if you don't win those markets and you're not present, you must be present to win in these contests, then somebody else might. And then all of a sudden you might find out you're Hillary Clinton and all of a sudden there's this guy Obama. Who the hell is he? Well, he's the next president. I mean, because he kind of caught it. He caught the right different sets of markets at the right time. So it's very hard to sleep well at night when you're having either running for a presidential election or in your case, running for category leader in a very, very, very interesting category. And so this issue of focusing on markets and privileging markets and sending your, if you look at how people take their campaign money, they do not, to take a phrase that Meg Darlinghouse's brother coined, they don't peanut butter their stuff across all 50 states. They spend where it's most valuable. And then there's offer power. And offer power, largely that's what we all spend. It's the only thing a customer can buy in this list is an offer. And a lot of us in this room make offers or sell offers or market offers. And offers in general are kind of like other offers. If you go into Safeway, you don't go, oh my God, you're on the cereal aisle, and yes, there's the wheat checks and there's rice checks and there's cornflakes, but you don't go, oh, like this. But every so often, these offers show up out of nowhere. Now, Mr. Jobs is probably the most famous, iconic offer creator because this last decade, he created 3 offers that have totally changed your life. And not only your life, the planet's life. So we know, and this valley is kind of famous for occasionally doing that, not as often as he has. But there's a chance to take offer power and use offer power to change market power, company power, and category above it, because it's that transformative an offer. Most of the time, offer power is reinforcing an existing position you already have. But in something as new as you are, because you're exploring the boundaries of your company power and your market power, your offer power is really, really important. And figuring out, again, instead of falling prey to featureitis, which is, there must be a list of enhancement requests in engineering that runs to 28 pages, and all of which are legitimate. But if all you do is just do the top 2 pages every whatever period you want to pick, you will lose. Because you'll never have done anything that really moves the needle. You'll just have made everything a little bit better, but it doesn't. So offer power and the risks you have to take with offer power, we're going to talk about that a little bit more explicitly. And then execution power, not execution power, did you do what you say you're going to do, although that's important. Execution power, can you drive a strategic initiative, whether it's an offer initiative or a market initiative or whatever, to the tipping point, to where the world actually capitulates and goes on your side of the table and starts pulling you in. Whether it's the world inside of LinkedIn, if it's an internal initiative, or whether the world outside of LinkedIn, if it's an external marketed initiative. So those are the 5 kinds of powers. And the idea is you invest in one or more of these sources of power in order to have future performance. And the challenge is the resources that you invest here are off. It's not typically R&D resources. R&D resources you can often hive off, and it's not. You can say, well, those are my lab guys, and this is R, and this is D, right? And people know how to separate R from D. But when you go to market, they don't separate. These are our sales guys for the newer stuff. These are our sales team for the older stuff. And a lot of the conflict happens in a performance culture where they look at their comp system and they say, well, we're going to optimize for this year's rev plan because that's my comp plan. And you never get that next business, the kind of resources it needs in the world, in the field. OK, so the question you can then ask is, you can use this as a diagnostic. So how cool are your categories? How powerful is your company? And do your competitors, see you as the team to beat, or is it somebody else? Are you in the right key markets? Are you going after the right ones? These are really, every one of these questions is one that the board of directors can have a real dialogue with your management team with. Do your core offers set the bar, or are you playing a lot of catch up? By the way, as you'll see in a minute, catch up is an important thing to be able to do too, and you'll see why. And then can you make stuff happen, or do you just keep on doing this, trying to reinvent the world every 2 to 3 years and firing the last team and bring, a little bit like the 49ers have been for the last 15 years, okay? Hopefully the new guy, Jim Harbaugh, Stanford, let's go, let's work it, okay. So where are you strong, where do you have to do better? And I would argue in most companies, you get a different answer. It's not like you always get the same answer with this thing, so where you are. Now, it's important to kind of get, how do you know when you're in trouble? So the way you know you're in trouble with category power is you can't get out of the categories you need to get out of. No matter how hard you try, and you can't get into the ones that matter. So that was the Kodak problem, and I think that's Dell's problem right now. It's been a struggle. Company power is, I can never ever do anything in a way that's unmatchable. I have these, I invest a little bit here, a little bit there, everywhere, and I never really change I never do anything that my competitors fear. So every time I make an announcement, nobody in my competitive set wakes up and says, oh my God, we're in trouble, okay? So as a result, the company power goes away. Market power is I can never actually pick a market and take it all the way to bright. So I participate in many markets, but I lead few or none. Offer power is I have a perfectly good offer, but it doesn't, nobody says I have to have one, right? They say, okay, it's perfectly good, but I don't have to have it. And then the execution power is, we work hard, we play hard, we launch products, they get bought, but we never actually reach a tipping point. We never actually get to the point where people go, you don't understand, it has to be this program, it has to be this offer. And so these are power failures. And so what happens is you say, okay, I can use these frameworks if I have a failure moment, or if I've done a scoring moment and I think, well, I don't have a failure yet here, but I want to focus here, that's how we use the hierarchy of powers in a consulting dialogue. And so what I thought I would do today is I want to focus on two places. I want to focus on offer power and this innovation management issue. I want to share a framework with you there. I think most clients that I spend time with make a mistake in this area. This framework calls out that mistake, so you can ask yourself, are we making that mistake or not? And if not, the good news is if it's a mistake that you personally, yourself, in this room with your colleagues can correct. So that's kind of cool. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about this execution power, specifically in relation to this crossing the chasm problem. Crossing the chasm is about how do you take a new offer to a tipping point where it is no longer perceived as too risky to buy. It kind of becomes embraced. That's what the chasm's about. And I want to talk about it in the context of how that plays out on the web, because it plays out very differently. So, offer power. When you look at offer power, it's basically a story about innovation. The question is, I'm going to do some new stuff with my offer. I'm going to innovate. I'm going to spend R&D money against it, marketing money against it, whatever. How do I get paid back? So if I put stuff in, how do I get the money back out? Well, the first place you get the money back out is you created an offer that was sufficiently different that the customer said, I want that offer, I don't want that one. So you won a sale, and by the way, they probably even pay a premium for it. So you've won a sale at a good margin. And everybody kind of gets differentiation. That's kind of the point of competitive advantage and offer. Interestingly, there's another thing you can do, though, which is neutralization. That's when somebody else put out an innovation, and now you've got to catch up. So a really good example of the importance of neutralization is when the iPhone came out. It came out in 2007. This guy, Stephen Elop, he left Microsoft to run Nokia. So Nokia is kind of in a tough spot right now. He sends out a memo in February of this year. He says, how is it possible that Apple came out with an iPhone in 2007 and Nokia has no similar product in 2011? And the answer is because we were too proud to copy. Nokia tried to spent 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010 with the Symbian people trying to out-Apple Apple, okay? Whereas Google said, screw it, we'll just copy it, right? RIM says, look, this is not an iPhone, but you know what? If you blur your eyes, there's some icons on the front here, and if you touch one of them, it'll change something. And so, Geoffrey, if you like to type with your thumbs, you know, you bought a BlackBerry because you're a thumb guy, right? And you get a little bit of eye candy, and that's good enough, right? So neutralize, and by the way, if you think about Microsoft's history, Microsoft is the champion of neutralization. They fundamentally neutralized this valley to a T. Every time we'd invent something here, they would neutralize it. And they'd take all the money, right? So they didn't invent word processing. They didn't invent spreadsheets. They didn't invent presentation stuff. They didn't invent the local area network. You know, that was WordPerfect. It was Lotus. It was Ashentate. It was for databases. It was Novell for local area networks. It was Netscape for browsers. Goodbye. Okay. So think how powerful neutralization can be. Okay. Right. And then the third thing you can do with innovation is productivity. You can just give yourself more resources back. Now, here's the key idea, because I think all of you are involved in making these trade-offs in your world. 3 different objectives. Separate from the competitive set, keep up with evolving norms, convert waste into value. Okay? The last one's internal. The first 2 are external. Right? Now, I want to kind of show you how these things play out, because I'm then going to point out something very painful to you, which is these 3 are incompatible. And that's going to create a very painful moment here. Okay? But here's how. So the first idea is, if you're going to differentiate, so you and your competitors exist in a competitive set, that yellow circle. And as long as you all are inside the yellow circle, what the customers are saying to you is, you guys have something, I want to buy it. None of you are must-have, so I can kind of choose among any one of you. So whoever gives me the best deal, I'm going to buy it. But if you can differentiate and take yourself outside of the yellow circle, all of a sudden, you've gained enormous bargaining power. Because now the world is set. And by the way, you know, so Apple is absolutely the clear example of this thing. But if you were going to give your kid, at some point during the last decade, a MP3 player, and you didn't give him an iPod, you lost, right? And then if you were to give him a phone, and it wasn't an iPhone, you lost again, right? I have a new tablet. It's from Samsung. Wrong. Thank you for playing. Right? So the point is, unmatchable offers are incredibly powerful when they're unmatchable, but they have to be literally unmatchable. And if you look at what in those cases, what makes the Apple's offers unmatchable isn't just the product, although it's gorgeous, but it was iTunes, right? I mean, iTunes made the iPod unmatchable. And then the app stores, made the iPhone unmatchable, and now the Apple retail store, where people will line up at midnight to get a white phone the next morning. I mean, come on, it's unmatchable, right? So that's what that's about. Okay, cool. And there are various companies. It's not just Apple. You have to have a crown jewel, though, that gives you a remarkable competitive advantage. So Salesforce has played the SaaS card against Oracle and SAP brilliantly, okay? And Skype with peer-to-peer and Wikipedia, et cetera. In other words, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be some spectacular Steve Jobs event, although he's fun to talk about. Enough on differentiation, you get it. Neutralization. Okay, you aren't Apple, but the world has said if you don't have a haptic interface with icons, if you can't write with your finger, we can't write with you, right? So Palm, who invented Graffito, remember that really cool pen-based thing? Well, yeah, exactly. All right, I'm old and you're young. Okay, it was cool at the time, trust me. But it's completely out of the competitive set, right? So you got to find some way to get back in, and the game here is get back in, be good enough. Don't try to be better, be good enough, but be good enough quickly. So what RIM was able to say is, look, I'm not going to beat Apple at Apple's game, but I have enough of what they're doing so that you can have some of that nice effect. And by the way, if you're not buying me for email, you're probably not buying me, because I'm really an email engine, and that's what I do for a living, right? So that's the neutralization thing. And then the third thing is for productivity, which is like, I'm not changing my offer at all. It's just that I can't afford to make it in the same old way. It's too expensive. And so what I have to do is optimize behind the scenes. And all three of those things require innovation. They require project teams. They require thought. You've got to dig for stuff. None of this comes for free. But when you look at the three playbooks, you look and you say, you know what? These cannot be run in the same release train. But we do it all the time. We take a release train and we put in differentiation objectives into that release train, and we put neutralization objectives, and we put productivity objectives into the same release train. And it's fatal. It's fatal, because here's what happens. If you look at this thing about differentiation and neutralization in their same release train, neutralization wants to go fast, which means you actually want to have a cadence of, I'm going to release this, well, I don't know what your cadence is. In a consumer world on the web, it might be every week or every month. In an enterprise world, it might be once or twice a year. But whatever it is, there's a cadence which says you want to hit the next release train, and you want to show the world you're catching up to whatever this other guy is in neutralization. Differentiation is it's not ready until it's ready. I mean, you can't schedule unmatchability. When it happens, it happens. But if you put the two in together, you're either going to dumb one down or slow it down. And so you're either slowing down neutralization or you're dumbing down differentiation in order to make your ship date. Really, really bad outcome. Okay? And if you think about the money you spend, the amount of money you'd spend on differentiation is whatever it takes. The amount of money you'd spend on neutralization is as little as possible to get back inside the yellow circle. Well, between the bottom of the yellow circle and the top of the yellow circle, when you move your offer inside the yellow circle, you don't gain bargaining power, but you spend a lot of money. So to be the cost of being at the bottom, being good enough, and the cost of being best in class, hugely different. But the value and the power you have, not much change. So the game is either play the game to be good enough or play the game to be unbeatable, but don't play the game in between. But 90% of R&D gets spent in between. That is the painful fact of corporate life. And our automobile industry is a testimony to how you can spend an infinite amount of R&D and never get outside the yellow circle. Okay? So you must, so that's the scary thing I wanted to put in front of you. Now, because if you don't make this call, I mean, you're the only people that know the offers. The people that you report in, they don't know that it's you. And you've got to find a way to just detach these release trains. Now, eventually they have to hook up to each other. I get that. But you got to find a way to detach the release train so that the neutralizers and the differentiators and the productivity optimizers each have a chance to have their day in court and work their rhythm, and then kind of assemble a late binding architecture is what you'd call it in computer science. At the very, very end, you would bind it. And don't compromise and don't trade off between those three things. Now, when you do trade off, you get failures and you get waste. And the waste comes from either a differentiation project that never got outside the yellow circle, a neutralization project that went way too far into the yellow circle, and by the way, was way too slow, or an optimization project that didn't get enough resources. Now, the bad news here is, by the way, I think the waste part of this pie chart should be much bigger. I was trying to be polite. But the point about it is, what's cool about that green, that's in your budget. You have that money. If you apply for that money next year, they don't know any better. They're going to give it to you again. Okay? You can do anything you want with the green money because it's not doing anybody any good. So you can fund anything if you can make these tough choices of saying what, and the opportunity to say either we're getting all the way out or we're not, or we're just going to go a little bit out of the way. So that's the good news about money. Waste is money that's in your budget today. If you stop wasting it, you're not going to get beat up. If you spend it on better things, there's an upside. So what are we waiting for? Now, politically, there's a reason why organizations have trouble with this, because they want to say, well, Larry got, his 3 head count, and Sherry got her 3 head count. I should get my 3 head count. No, Geoffrey, you shouldn't, right? It's like, no. And so figuring out, because you're doing a differentiation initiative or you're doing a productivity initiative, no, that's not what we're. But having those tough discussions is important. But just think about that as you're spending time and you look around the projects you're involved with right now. Look for the waste in that gap. Not waste because people are doing bad work. Waste because they're doing work that you will never get paid for. Okay. And by the way, so we've had, that one pie chart, you can spend 8 hours on that pie chart with any really interesting team, because first of all, the first 30 minutes is, well, I'm not going to be the first one to confess, but eventually you kind of, it's like therapy, right? Okay, 12 steps, okay, whatever. But you kind of get it out, and then it gets really interesting, which is, okay, we've got this thing, the elephant in the room or whatever, we've got this thing, green shimmering thing on the table. Okay, we've named it, we've isolated it. What the hell are we going to do about it? And the way in which you end up having to reorganize and rethink the way you organize your teaming, and the way you organize your project tracking, and the way you organize your metrics, and the way you organize your compensation becomes very, very, and the leaders you want to appoint in for different kinds of projects, it all changes. And it changes in ways that creates really cool opportunities and really cool dynamics. So it's a very, very liberating thing after you get through it's like anything else. The first part, not so much fun. Okay. I want to do one more thing to share with you, and then if we have some time here, I'd like to take Q&A, but I'm sort of, as I said, fire hose. I'm in a fire hose modality right now, so you came, obviously you can deal with it. Okay. So execution power. So this notion of execution power was, so again, the tipping point idea was, in crossing the chasm, you had the early adopters, every one of whom was kind of a cool experience, and they would adopt, and they liked you and you liked them, and the offer wasn't perfect, but you could work it. But then everybody else would be saying, I don't think this is ready for prime time. And so they'd hold back, and that was what created the chasm. And the idea was, if you could get enough people on the other side of the chasm, and the idea was focus on one segment that might be predisposed to go early because they're in pain, we call them pragmatists in pain, if you could get those guys to start adopting, what would happen is, the way pragmatists make decisions is they say, well, I'll do it when I see everybody else doing it. So that's a tipping point idea, right? It's like junior high dance, right? Girls on one side of the gym, boys on the other side of the gym. This is back when girls and boys actually danced in pairs. But at that time, it was challenging to get a dance to go. So the point was, is that, didn't happen, did happen, right? So that's a tipping point. So crossing the chasm was about taking a market to a tipping point. Well, okay, you're on the web. Doesn't work that way. So then the question was, so we spent some time, and this is more my time at Moore Davidow, dealing with the media folks there, saying, well, how does it actually happen or not happen on the web? And we began to say, well, look, the way to think about a business on the web is there's actually 4 gears that are going to interact here. And the idea is to start getting these gears spinning in a way that they begin to reinforce each other. So there's a gear around acquisition, which is just can you get it going? So you run an experiment in acquisition. You run an experiment in engagement. You run an experiment in monetization. Now, not so linearly. You might be doing these all four at one time. And in fact, what you're really trying to figure out is, can I start getting interactions between the gears, okay? And as I said, if I can get them going, can I get it going faster and faster and faster and faster and faster? And the goal eventually is to get a tornado, right? A tipping point. The market goes the other way. So when you look at that model, you say, look, these are the elements in that model that we are trying to isolate. And at Moore Davidow, if you brought your business plan to Moore Davidow and said, I want to start one of these companies, these are the 7 things we would check. And I think you should I think you probably already have this checklist, but if you don't, you should look at it. So obviously, how fast are you acquiring new users? So that's important. But just as importantly, are you engaging them? So one of the problems with Groupon right now is they have very fast acquisition, but it's not clear that you're not getting, I don't know if you guys are getting Groupon fatigue, but it's an easy experience to have. So all of a sudden you say, well, my acquisition rates are high, but my engagement rates are low. That's a non-sticky. That was what I mean by non-sticky, right? So, and by the way, look, we're talking about actually measuring these things, because on the web, it can't be anecdotal. It's all got to be driven algorithmically. So it's all data, it's all math, or it doesn't exist. So okay, so how do I measure your engagement? Well, length, time, depth, frequency of user engagement. And there's ways to do it. Right? Then virality, okay, and our friends at Zynga, they built virality into the structure of their games in a very powerful way, and the games were engaging enough that if your friend did ask you to take care of their cow when they went on vacation, you actually did, or maybe not. If some of those cows are dead, okay. But that was going, and then the question was monetization, and of course, how would you ever monetize a game that's free? Well, because 3% of the users will do anything to get badges. And so therefore, they have a monetization. Actually, Zynga has made all 4 of these things spin, right? And there are various ways. And monetization is always a challenge, because when you introduce monetization, it could slow down you could have acquisition, engagement, virality going, because it's all free and we're all doing it, and it's really great. And all of a sudden somebody says, oh, and we want you to pay for it. It's like that. So think about monetization as like a clutch car. You want to kind of like ease the clutch in so you can kind of get good for it. Don't pop the clutch, you might stall the engine, kind of thing. So those are the 4 gears, and it's an art. And the problem is, and it's not linear. See, crossing the chasm is very linear. This is not linear. This is a simultaneous equation kind of problem, right? And then there are these issues, the other issues around churn. So obviously churn is just kind of a leak in the boat, so it's kind of the opposite, of acquisition. But you got to watch your churn rates. And of course, subscription models in particular, you guys in particular, you must know your churn all the time. And you must find ways to detect churn, because it is the cholesterol in your bloodstream, right? This is the plaque that can harden your arteries if you're not careful. So you need to detect it. But you also, we had a little discussion this morning, you need to find some way to model the lifetime value of a customer. Because you're in a subscription business where you're saying, look, the investments I make in acquiring a customer, some of them get monetized, like in a transactional customer, I get that. But other people, you say, well, what is the lifetime value of a user of LinkedIn? It's hard to, that's hard to calculate. Now, if they had to pay a subscription every month, like a premium user, I think you guys, okay, what's the lifetime value of a premium user? Because you know it's going to churn off at some level. You have to calculate that. Because once you calculate that, you can figure out, well, then how much would I be willing to pay to get another premium user? Assuming that premium user is not a fake premium user, a real premium user, they meet our model. And by the way, the thing about models you discover is every model you make is wrong. Every model you make is wrong, because the world doesn't actually fit any model ever. But is it directionally correct? And at the margin, was I too high or too low? Too left or too right? That's what models do for you. And if you make your models public, and you're willing to be wrong publicly and explicitly, then an entire organization can course correct with you as you go along. We said it was going to be here, and damn it, it was over here. Okay, let's move, right? But if I'm private, or if I'm worried about being wrong, what I'll say is, well, you know what? I think it'll be between here and here. And I'm right. but where do I steer the boat, right? So it's much more important to say, go north-northeast 10.5 degrees, and then say, oops, I meant to say 12. Oops, 11. Oops, 13. Because now you can turn the boat and navigate. So it is really important to get very explicit with these things. Program productivity, how much return do I get on these things? So I spent a marketing program against an outcome. What was my yield from that program? These are the ones that drive venture investment. I think these would be useful tools for you. And the idea behind here, and this is what I'll close with, is what we're talking about is in the interest of program funding, there's kind of sustaining programs which you invest either during the invention stage or the deployment stage or the optimization stage that just keep returning. They're kind of like annuities. We spend X amount of every year on corporate branding or on a quality program or whatever the heck it is. But when you're trying to scale something, there's a tipping point issue where if you have a launch budget, for example, and you spend your launch budget and the thing doesn't get over the tipping point, the rocket falls back to Earth, it doesn't get into orbit, you lost, right? So it's really important that when you have a transition problem that you get past the transition point. And so what we've learned about transition programs is that this is like crossing the chasm, any place where you really do have, in any transition program, you do have early adopters and you have chasms and beachheads and whatnot. And these programs cannot be evaluated as, they gave me a bunch of headcount and a bunch of people and we did good work and we got an award and, oh, by the way, we didn't get to the tipping point. It's like, no dice, right? This is not about best efforts. This is you must get to the tipping point. So when you look at that problem and you look at the kinds of people that you are and that your colleagues are, this is a model about 4 different kinds of person. And my bet is that I'm going to show 4 columns. One of these 4 columns should feel more like you than the other 3, okay? And by the way, one of them should probably feel a lot less like you. Like, I don't know which column I am, but I sure as heck I'm not that column, okay? But what you're going to hope, what I'm going to hope, and what you're going to hope is that in this room and on this collective virtual room, that we have plenty of people in each of the 4 columns because you're going to need them. So the first thing you need in tech, and the one that we give a lot of media coverage to, is the inventors. I'm not going to, this is kind of visionaries, creativity, and they like to work with these little tight integrated teams that can go really fast, and they're really smart people, and we just go, right? And that's when you're just in experimental mode. You haven't even picked which way we're going. We're just trying to even figure out, do we have an engine here at all? When you want to scale it, you then want to get somebody who we call a deployer. Now, a deployer is not an inventor. A deployer says, I'm going to standardize a bunch of things. You're going to stop inventing because I'm going to start selling or making or just getting this stuff out there. I'm very competitive. By the way, I'm going to try to take money away from other people so they'll spend it on us. I'm very tough-minded. That's a stupid feature. Cut it out. I have to have that feature or you're going to get fired. That kind of stuff. So none of the open-mindedness of an inventor. Very cut and dry. They like to run things in the functions. I run the sales function, I run the engineering function, I run whatever. But this is the key to transitioning to scale. The inventor model does not scale. Okay? It needs to have a deployment. And this is why venture capital often replaces the founder with a second CEO before the company is actually through the venture capital phase. Because they start with a gorgeous inventor, but not many people can be inventor deployers. Now, I believe the word entrepreneur can be defined as an inventor deployer. That's what I think is an entrepreneur. If you're one and not the other, I don't think you're an entrepreneur. I think an entrepreneur is an inventor deployer. Now, later on, once the category gets established, now it's much more of a, this is now in our core business thing. Now all of a sudden you're looking to say, I need to get some more cash out of this cow, and now I need an optimizer who is much more of a control culture kind of person. Not as competitive, not as creative, more control-oriented. But what they're going to do is they're going to help us transition to greater productivity. And essentially free up, because there's a lot of waste during the invention and deployment phase that you can take out once you're no longer inventing and once you're no longer doing a lot of deploying. And that waste can then be repurposed in the front end. Well, when you look at that, what this says is, in the history of any offer, rather than have one team in charge of that offer from womb to tomb, what it says is you ought to have an inventor phase led by inventors. At some point, you should sense the transition and actually transfer authority to deployers. Now, they might be on the same team, but different people are now in the lead. And then at some future state, we ought to transfer it again to optimizers. That's not normally what corporations do. Corporations tend to keep the same person in charge the whole time, which means at some point or other, we're not optimal. If you're going to do the transitions, you're going to need the fourth member of this quartet. These are people who are essentially great at facilitating transitions. We call them orchestrators, right? They're very collaborative. They're very empathetic. And they're very good at leading cross-functional teams or virtual teams. And the purpose of these folks is to manage the transitions and not to do it any other time. Okay? So the idea is don't have cross-functional teams for this. The reason cross-functional teams get a horrible reputation is they get used way too often. Okay? They're valuable at the transition points and at no other time. So it's really important as you look at the structure of the stuff. So again, the reason I wanted to share this model with you is, again, you live this model. You're living in this world every day. And you ought to think about yourself. First of all, you ought to think about yourself in your own career. Which of these am I best at? Which of these do I like? Which of these am I gifted at? Which of these am I not so good at? And that should tell you where in the life cycle of a product you want to be. So if you're a great inventor, you don't want to be, in a mature product line. And if you're a great optimizer, you probably don't want to be in a, in startup product line. If you're a great deployer, you need to play the game at scale. You got to be careful not to get involved too early, but you also don't want to get involved too late. If you're too early, the thing isn't really ready to scale, and if it's too late, the market share wars have all been fought and won. So where are we? And then if you are this kind of orchestrator person, then focus your talents where they can make the difference, which is around these tipping points. So, let the category state, maturity state be the guide of which person should lead. Use transition programs to switch execution modes, organize around the modes, not around the offers, and then adjust management to support different modes. If you just think about career development, now partly when you're young enough, you say, I don't know which of these four I'm best at. So part of career development early in your career is, I'd like to try all four just to find out if I'm any good at it or not. But eventually, as you get to a certain age, you realize, I have to stop working on my faults and start working on my strengths, because I've been working on my faults for 20 years. They really haven't changed. So I'm going to go for the strengths. But if you're thinking about staffing a team yourself, think about these roles. Think about where you are in the life cycle of the project or product you're involved with. So just to kind of recap, last slide. The hierarchy of policy, what the escape velocity book is about, is saying, look, there is a set of issues that organize around these various levels of power. We have to have clear management dialogue at them. The ones at the top tend to have to happen at the board and the executive team. The ones at the bottom tend to have to happen in the field and in the factory and at the customer service, in the day-to-day work. But at every level, we have to have a dialogue around power, and we need to actually create accountable metrics for how we're doing versus power, and then build them into our compensation systems, into our management systems. So, because right now, the management systems we have are horribly overweighted to performance and underweighted to power. So basically, the people we reward in business today are the people that consume power and transform it into performance, which is an important thing to do. But we're not properly rewarding to the people that extract waste and convert it into new power, which is kind of what you also have to do, and that's how you avoid the stuff. So anyway, those are some thoughts I wanted to share with you. So thank you, first of all, for listening. I appreciate that. I don't know how much time we have, but can somebody give me an estimate? We have 7 minutes. 7 minutes. And I would love to have, if your crap detector went off and you just like to push back, or if you have a question, I'd love to. And there's a microphone. Yes. Okay,
I had the pleasure of hearing you talk to the technology team at Yahoo, and you put Yahoo on your dead in the water slide.
Yep.
What happened there?
This is a really tough situation. Here's my view, and I'm not an insider. So when I first met Yahoo, Carol was just coming in, and I think I think everybody felt the problem statement, including Carol, was this is a great company. It's got a lot of creativity. It's got a lot of inventors. It's disorganized. It needs adult supervision. And I think if you think about Carol, she's kind of a deployer optimizer. She never claimed to be the most inventive person. I will get the trains to run on time. And I think, so we thought, okay, let's install a team that can just do adult supervision and get the cats back into the boxes and let's go. And I think, for example, hiving off the search business was a very important act of a deployer optimizer to say, look, we cannot fight. We can't fight two wars on two fronts with where we are today. We got to get out of one business. Now, she could have picked the other one. You could say go either way, but I think actually I would have made the choice that she made. Okay. So I think all that was to the good. Then I think what happened was the whole notion that the world would want an aggregated media portal as the destination site for digital life began to morph. And because that was Yahoo's claim to fame, that was its anchor capability. And if you look at how people are experiencing the web, particularly now more on mobile and more Twitterish and more LinkedInish and more other stuff, the notion of being the media aggregator, even though the advertisers still want media aggregation, the world is drifting in a different direction. And Facebook, which when we first had the dialogue around strategy at Yahoo, was clearly in everybody's sights, but we thought could be an ally. Because we thought, we'll be the aggregator. Well, we'll put Facebook on the aggregation page too. It'll be great. You'll come to us, you'll go to Facebook. It turned out, oops, it got reversed. And then all of a sudden, the whole notion of being a digital media property, aggregated digital media property, and AOL is simply an example of that model gone further down the road. I think it's lost air cover, which means it loses. There's still a lot of, it's still a big property, right? I think it may still have more eyeballs than anybody on the planet. I'm not sure, maybe not anymore, but it's still a big property. But you just feel like the air is kind of going out of the balloon, and then people get cranky. And then, of course, the talent war in this valley is unbelievable. So the talent leaves, and then all of a sudden it's like, and the way you keep talent is you have to have visionary product people at the center, right? And that's not Carol. That's not who she is. And nor was she hired to be, nor did anybody think she was. But we thought it would work. So I think those are the challenges. I love companies. I want us to find a way to morph. But now what's happening then you start getting the wolves circling, and then you have these very, very public things, and at some point things start whirling down, which is why I put them on this list. Now I think probably I was premature, but I'm Irish. Irish people tell stories, right?
So just a clarification. So those 4 roles which you showed, are you advocating that the company should go through those roles in a linear fashion, or that 4 levels you were showing was at the market offering level or at the company stage level?
Okay, I think the four roles are inherent in any organization, any time. So just if I were to do a Myers-Briggs or the equivalent of that for this thing, I think we would find out we have people who are good at all 4 roles. The management task is to say, where in the life cycle of the thing I'm responsible for are we? Are we in the invention phase of a life cycle? Are we in the deployment phase? Are we in the optimization phase? And then my job would be, I need to make sure that the core leader, the person who's at the top of that organization at this time, meets the profile that fits that. We don't normally do that. And so as a result, we have people who either try to do too much invention during a mature phase, or too much optimization during an early phase, or they emphasize transactional metrics for deployment when it's too early or too late. We do a lot of that stuff. So what I'm really trying to do is to get people to put the right kinds of personalities, and it's a personality thing, in the role at the right time. And what I'm asking you to do is for you to understand your own personality and to take yourself out of harm's way and put yourself in success's way by saying, I am a natural, whatever it is, I'm a natural. I should continually look for assignments that play to my strengths. Now, as I said, if you're very young, you probably want to at least try everyone once. But at some point, what you learn is you're not good at everything. Yeah.
Quick question for you. We in the engineering end are currently going through partially through a transition phase, as you mentioned in the end, with a cross-functional team. You mentioned that the cross-functional aspect is overused sometimes. Do you feel there's sometimes a place for an always existing cross-functional team in the organization that sort of maybe changes size and scope all the time? Or do you really just sort of pinpoint now, 3 months and then over, or? Okay,
so first of all, I think these things probably are 4 to 8 quarters for significant. I think any transition that takes more than 6 quarters is probably never going to happen because I think the institution can't maintain continuity with it. I think tiny transitions take at least a quarter. So let's use that as the scope of the duration of any instantiation of a transition team. it feels to me like it ought to last from 2 to 6 quarters. And I do think it should dissolve. So these things should not be allowed to institutionalize themselves. Having said that, the notion that you would have a cadre of people that are good at doing transition projects that you could repurpose as the transition requirements move around, I think is a cool idea. But I think institutionalizing a transition team too much, the problem then is, what if there's a time when there's no transition to do? Well, people will fill their lives with work, and they'll find a transition that doesn't need transitioning. So you could have that problem. Okay? Yeah.
Hi, you had mentioned that it's always good to strive for that tipping point, and I always viewed tipping point as a retrospective phenomena that you say, oh, looking back, there was a tipping point. How do you know if the tipping point actually exists and where it may be? Because you may be going endlessly into a mirage.
Yeah, that is a profound question, which I probably should say. I'm saving that answer. I'm going to leave right now because I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. It's a bet. So basically what you're saying, now, we do know that there are network effects and recurring effects, and we, as you say, we can always see them in retrospect. So and this is back to the first slide, which says, in a world where there's no data about the future, what you have to do is say, I'm going to make a bet that this is a tipping point situation, which means I'm going to bet that there'll be certain metrics that I can track to, and I'm going to track to those things, and I'm going to drive program outcomes to meet those metrics. And my bet is that will create a state that, looking back, we will say that was a tipping point. And it's a time-bound offer. At some point, I run out of budget and time, and I either got there or I didn't. But what I do want to do is to say to people, if you didn't get there, don't compensate yourself. Because there's no reward for anybody else if you don't get to the tipping point. And what most people do is they say, if I did a good job, I should be compensated and rewarded. In tipping point outcomes, no, you shouldn't. I'm sorry. I mean, you should get something, but not much. Okay? It looks like we're getting the hook. All right. Thanks a lot. Okay, did you want to ask a question, or what do you want to do?
Hello.
Okay, great. Yeah, I want to thank you, first of all,
Okay,
thought-provoking discussion. Thank you all for attending. A small token of our appreciation, your in-map, that is your visualization of your network. Geoffrey's a very connected individual, as you might expect. So,
Wow. India,
you.
China, and Japan. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow.